Hello and welcome to the Open Era podcast. My name is Devang Desai. This week, Simon and I are taking some time off, so we decided to look back at an old episode profiling two of our favorite players, Steffi Graf and Monica Seles. We go back to 1995 in the US Open Final, a match between two of the all-time greats, but also a match that marked the return of Monica Seles to center stage at a major after the actions of Gunter Parche in Hamburg in 1993. Of course, Monica Seles was on track to smash all of the record books until Parche, a Steffi Graf superfan, stabbed Seles during a changeover. Tennis was changed forever. I think we see the hallmarks of that change in tournaments today in terms of security and elsewhere, but we wanted to look back at this match because of these two titans of the sport and also look specifically at this current juncture in time in tennis in 1995 as this rivalry was rekindled thanks to Monica Seles' remarkable comeback. We hope you enjoyed the episode. Reminder, we are on Twitter at OpenEraPod and patreon.com/OpenEra. Join us there, get episodes early, plus join us on the Discord where we're chatting tennis all the time. Once again, hope you enjoyed this episode. Steffi Graf, Monica Seles, and the 95 US Open Final. Hello and welcome to the Open Era podcast. My name is Devang Desai and I'm joined as always by Mr. Simon Bushell. Bush, I got a desk.
Wow, you're fully grown up at this point, Devang. How does it feel to join the ranks of 30-year-olds?
I'm not doing any promotions here or hashtag ad, but I was blown away by the service and delivery from Leon's. It's a Canadian brand, but they have a tracker on their website that is better than any tracker I've ever seen. Like, I could see where this guy was driving to a crazy detail. Yeah, so overall, I'm just over the moon.
I don't know whether we should be celebrating that or concerned about the level of micro-security that we have to have on our poor delivery drivers at this point.
The guy was like, most people aren't waiting at the door when we get here. I'm like, oh, yeah. I'm not like most people. But my desk tribulations aside, it also means that I am set up nicely for another look back into the tennis history books. Now, a week or so ago, I wrote a piece for The Score about 5 potential Last Dance style documentaries that we'd like to see in tennis, and I touched on Monica Seles. So that led Bush and I to decide to cover a Seles match, and if we're covering a Monica Seles match, it has to be against Steffi Graf, because that rivalry was set up to be something that we would be talking about for many, many years, Bush.
Yeah, and I think for the pair of us as well, we're both in our early 30s, we probably missed both Graf and Seles just a fraction. I don't think we grew up with their rivalry as much as some people who are maybe a generation following us. So it's kind of interesting for the pair of us to go back, and we were aware of them, but to actually be able to go back and watch some of their matches and their rivalry is really interesting.
Definitely just at that point where I was starting to watch, so I caught the end of Graf and the end of Seles. I mean, the end of Graf was super quick, right? Like, the injuries became a huge problem and Monica hung around for a while, but you're definitely right. And before we cover the match itself, and it's the 95 US Open Final, we'll talk about each player individually, and we'll start with Monica Seles, Bush, because overall, I think, and I'm speaking for tennis fans in general, I think it's fair to say Monica Seles is overlooked when we talk about the greatest players of all time, because there is a span here where we're talking about one of the greatest runs possibly ever.
Definitely. When we talk about the modern player, and we spoke about it a little bit when we spoke about Andre Agassi in terms of a game that very easily transitioned into the modern era in terms of the power and some of the length of the stroke, she was right up there, and she was a phenom at an early age, and there's not going to be many like her who really came onto the scene and demolished the competition quite like she did.
The story's interesting. She comes with her brother from Yugoslavia, the then Yugoslavia, alone basically for a year to train at the Bollettieri Tennis Academy. She had opened some eyes a few years earlier, winning the Junior Orange Bowl in Miami. So she comes with her brother. Her parents follow soon after. She plays her first professional tournament at the age of 14 in 1988. Her dad, Karoli, is basically her main coach at this point, even after the Bollettieri stuff. But we go into a run here starting in 1990, basically, where she wins 36 matches in a row.
in 1991, she wins the Australian Open, the French Open, skips Wimbledon due to injury, and then beats Martina Navratilova in the US Open final. The next year in 1992, she wins the Australian Open again, the French again, and the US Open again, and she makes her first Wimbledon final where she loses to Graf. Between January 91 and February 93, Seles won 22 titles and reached 33 finals out of the 34 tournaments she played. She was 159-12, Bush, and 55-1 in Grand Slams over that time. That is outrageous.
It is, and I think she perfectly lines up in that period where the game started to change. And I mentioned that she is a modern player. The way that she hit the ball, I think, was her calling card more than anything else. The power and the accuracy that she was able to strike a tennis ball with is astonishing, and it really is phenomenal when we watched this final in 95. I think one of the funny things looking back about it is you see some of the news clippings about it and you hear some of the ways that she's spoken of. The one thing that comes to mind that's spoken of, especially at an early age, is the grunt. And I'm listening to this and I'm watching her play and I'm thinking, that's nothing, man. She sounds fine. She sounds like a normal tennis player.
You know what it is, Bush? It's music to my ears. That is a world-class grunt of not too menacing, not too over the top. Just, you know what? That's the sound you make. I loved it.
It sounds like an athletic person trying to do something that's quite difficult. And I think she plays with a slightly unorthodox fashion, right? She has that double-handed forehand, and I think at the time she looked slightly awkward in some of her shots, but her backhand is a thing of beauty. It really is. It's one of the best shots of all time, just the way that she's able to direct the ball. But yeah, she's technically perfect, and it shows with the results that she had early in her career that she's able to strike the ball as well as she is at such an early age.
She's an 8-time Grand Slam winner, and she's still a teenager. The world is most certainly Monica Seles' oyster until we arrive in Hamburg, Germany, in April of 1993, when Seles was attacked by a delusional man, a Graf superfan, Gunter Parche. This happened during a changeover. There's video of it. You can hear, the camera's not on Seles, thankfully, but you can hear a scream and people rush over to her. Parche ended up serving a suspended sentence, which is outrageous. We'll get into that a bit later, but we're talking about an athlete at the peak of her powers, taken down by something that we had never seen before to that point, and we haven't seen since. And I don't think there's any way to understate how important, or overstate, how important this moment was, Bush, because everything changed for Seles after this, and it's impossible to imagine how it couldn't.
I would argue it's a black mark against the sport that's never really recovered from it. I don't think the fallout really did any favors to the governing bodies, certainly not the German Tennis Federation, which Monica Seles has some very, very choice things to say and continues to say about them in terms of security that's available at matches. I think some things around the world have got a little better, but we see examples even throughout the 2000s and in the last 10 years of fans getting onto the court and players just being terrified. And I think that is largely in no small part to what happened to Monica Seles. It's a truly harrowing video to watch, to hear her screaming like that on court. The stabbings, it's not a huge indent. That's a horrible word to use, but I'm trying to think of a way to describe it. Like it's not a career-ending injury that she suffers on the hands of this, but it's the emotional turmoil that happens for the fact that somebody runs onto the court when you're not expecting it and stabs you in the back, quite literally stabs you in the back in this occasion. Harrowing is the only right word I can use to describe it here.
It's crazy, and the footage we watched of this final included the pre-match stuff, and it showed Seles and Graf making the walk to the stadium among the fans, and Seles is smiling and ready to go, but I can't imagine how that would feel for her after this, because how can you trust anyone, and how can you trust your safety in surroundings that are supposed to be pristine? And this is a tennis tournament, a professional tennis tournament, and yet this happens. Shortly after the stabbing, a players' meeting was held at the Italian Open in Rome. Seles was number 1 at the time, and there was a debate whether she should preserve that ranking until she comes back, or whether we should move on and I guess go on his business as usual. Steffi Graf was not there for the vote because she skipped the Italian Open, but 17 of the top 25 WA players voted against preserving Seles' world number 1 ranking. Initially, I was reading about this at the time, and I my first view is, wow, that's extremely harsh, and like, is there no sympathy, no empathy for Seles? But I guess for those other players, like, what can you say? Like, they got to keep going. They gotta keep making their bread.
Yeah, I think hindsight's 20/20 on this one, isn't it? I think you would like to think the best of individuals, and that she would preserve that number one ranking. And we see it as well. Like, this debate has not gone anywhere in regards to some of the top female players having maternity leave and whether that ranking should be protected or not. This debate, in terms of people who are away from the tour in no small part due to either injury or something beyond their control, or just, doing an amazing thing like giving birth. And it's still a debate inside of tennis. So that one's not really gone anywhere.
Monica Seles returned to the WTA in August of 1995. The then WTA president Martina Navratilova proposed that she return as number one alongside Steffi Graf as joint number ones. Arantxa Sanchez Vicario and Gigi Fernandez said hell no, because their ranking would be affected, and I get that. But still, interesting, the politics, right? Seles comes back in Canada, of all places. She beats Amanda Coetzer. Love saying that last name, Coetzer. You're a real tennis head if you know how to say Amanda Coetzer. Agree, Bush?
Well done, Devang. You can take a victory lap. Look at that. He gets a desk, ladies and gentlemen, and suddenly he's the most eloquent person in the world. Do you have a dictionary sitting on that table?
Not yet. So Seles wins in Canada. She makes a tournament record for fewest games dropped throughout the tournament by a champion, and she's good to go for the U.S. Open. We move now to Steffi Graf Bush. Now we talk about personal turmoil and what Monica Seles had to go through to come back. There is a very strange mirroring going on here between Monica and Steffi in terms of starting off incredibly well and dealing with some really tough hardships. But you talk about Steffi Graf, we're talking about arguably the greatest player of all time, Simon.
She is, and I think it's one of those things that maybe due to the fact that we grew up with watching Serena Williams be so dominant on the WTA tour, Steffi Graf tends to get a little bit forgotten, even though she won 22 Grand Slams, and you could make the case as the greatest player of either side, men or women's, just given what she has done throughout her career and given the competition that she played against. But yeah, it started out in strange fashion, you have to say, and her family has all sorts of problems that run throughout her entire career.
In 1988, the year I was born, she wins the Golden Slam, which included Olympic gold in Seoul that had never been done before, and I doubt it gets done again. In 1990, she's playing in a tournament in Berlin, and Bild, a German newspaper, asks about a scandal involving Graf's father. The difficulty of answering questions about that matter came to a head at a Wimbledon press conference when Steffi Graf broke down in tears. She parts ways with her coach in 1991. So in 1988, Steffi Graf is on top of the tennis world. She's done something that no one has ever done before. And when we say no one has ever done before, we're talking about Martina and Chris Everett and the greats of the greats. Like this lady from Mannheim, Germany is crazy good and somehow managing to do all of this while her family is going through some crazy tax stuff and her father is basically going to jail, and the chances of her and her father speaking are very small. Apparently she had not talked to her father since August 2nd coming into this US Open final. So like it's just a wild series of events. But Bush, I wanted to ask you specifically about this because the background and the drama, she's also got a toe injury. She's got a calf injury that she was dealing with forever. But I watched Steffi play this final and you wouldn't know any of that stuff is going on. And what I mean by that is the fluidity and the tactical brilliance. It is what a treat to watch Steffi Graf.
I think she has that beautiful thing that a lot of top athletes have, where if you put a layman in front of the television or at a live event and you say, what does she do well? The person will be like, I don't really know. She's just really good. She just wins points. And I think technician is the word that I would use to describe about Steffi Graf. She's just a machine. She really is. She does everything exceptionally well. There's no hole in her game at all. And I think that's the best compliment that I can pay to her. She is so smart on a tennis court. It's beautiful to watch in this 95 final. It's amazing to watch someone at the peak of their powers do amazing things.
Monica Seles not being around in 1993 obviously created a vacuum that Graf happily fills. She wins 65 of the 67 matches and 3 of the 4 Grand Slam events, including the year-end championships in 93. That's pretty good, Bush. And obviously, the situation surrounding this all, it's so bizarre and so tough because Steffi Graf knows that the person who stabbed Monica Seles was a Graf quote unquote super fan, and she has no responsibility at all for these actions. But the press, the fans are saying, "Oh, like your guy or this crazy guy did this for you," and Gunter Parche is still somehow allowed to send Steffi Graf flowers, which was mentioned on the broadcast, which I thought was extremely crazy. But it's got to be a lot, obviously, for Monica Seles. But for Steffi Graf, you're coming into this like, do people think that I tried to have this happen, or like the speculation, the rumors are just a lot.
Well, we've touched on it a little bit, but you have to understand that during this period of the time, Steffi Graf was the person on tour. She was the sport, and Monica Seles coming up to try and take that crown. There were a lot of super fans, and we even see it in today's sports, right? About how the competition of people's ardent support for individual players in whether it's team sports or individual sports, it can get very partisan, it can get very tribal, and it can get very weird in a lot of ways. It can get into all of the, digging deep into my psychology. It gets into all of the parasocial relationships, right? That you think you're, in a relationship with someone just based upon seeing them on television or reading about them. And you're not, you know nothing about the person. And it's very sad in a situation like this where it manifests itself in a deeply disturbing way.
Graf's father was arrested in August of 1995 and sentenced to 45 months in jail. He spent more time in jail, serving 25 months in total, than Gunter Parche did for stabbing Monica Seles. I'm not here to debate the merits of tax fraud versus stabbing someone. I understand there is some nuance here, but that is ridiculous, and I truly enjoyed Martina Navratilova going off on the German judicial system during this broadcast. I thought that was great.
I mean, no, it's not like Martina to have an opinion on these things. She has a few choice opinions during this final, which are very fun to listen to.
And you know what? I think this is the best booth that we've had since we've been doing the look backs, Bush, because it's a young Jim Nance, it's a CBS crew, but Jim Nance is definitely super young here, getting his ears wet. He's beside Mary Carrillo and Martina Navratilova, two heavyweights, two people who know the way around a mic, and he basically just sits at the back and lets them control the flow. I thought that was great.
He's a perfect pivot man for a tennis match here. He describes the action of what's happening. He tees up the storylines and then lets the people talk who knows what they're doing. It's broadcasting and commentating 101, and he's really good here. It's before, he has 30 years of cynicism over the sporting world. And I think this happens with a lot of commentators, which is they lose a little bit of passion in some ways. And I think he's still pretty good. I don't think he's lost any of that to a huge amount. But when you're very early in your career, you can tell that someone's deeply invested and very excited about the sport that they're watching and commentating on.
I think he also knew he's not the expert here. He's sitting beside probably the greatest women's player ever, and Mary Carrillo, who knows a hell of a lot about tennis, right? So he's gonna let them talk, and I enjoyed that because you definitely don't see enough of that today. Bush, before we get to the match itself, I wanted to ask you about just the technical aspect of what do you think made them so successful? Because you touched on it a bit about Monica Seles and that orthodox two-handed method from both sides. I think the slice became a massive part of this match, but it also, Seles's movement is pretty remarkable. I think quickness is something that you have to win at the highest level of tennis. If you're not moving well, you're done. But anticipation wise, that's some of the best movement I've seen from Seles, particularly in the early second set.
I think you're completely right in using the word anticipation. She reads the game incredibly well, but she's very, very aggressive. And in a way that baseliners up to this point in the early 90s were more seen as the dirt rats, the people running around at the back of the court, the people who were just there to try and get the ball back and play defensively. She completely shifted that narrative in terms of what a baseliner could be, to be able to step into the court, to hug the baseline and be able to hit forehands and backhands for winners. And there's a lot of them in this match. I think on the opposite side, I mentioned the word technician for Steffi Graf, but she's someone who just knows how to control a point and be able to construct a point. And it takes immense skill to be able to do that. And she does utilize that one-handed slice on the backhand side. But she has a very unorthodox forehand as well. She takes the ball very, very late. And you can see the difference in technique in terms of how they were raised in the different era, because Seles looks like a modern day tennis player. And I'm going to say this again because it says it as an audium. And I think the 90s is a really interesting microcosm of this, just in terms of how the shots are created. But if you look at the pair of them, you can tell they were raised in different eras in regards to how to swing a tennis racket on both forehand and backhand. Because Graf looks like she was raised, and she probably was raised, by swinging a wooden tennis racket. And it makes it look that way when she hits a forehand. It starts much higher, the backswing is not as long, and subsequently it looks a bit more awkward, especially with a modern day tennis racket here. So this one's a really good, interesting watch, just simply to see the contrast in styles from the technical standpoint.
I think you see Steffi Graf's serve also play a massive role in this match, for good and bad. It's truly one of the better ones we've watched, and we're going to cover it right after the break. See you on the other side. Welcome back to the Open Era podcast. We're talking Seles Graf 1995 US Open Final. Talked about the broadcast team and how good I thought they were. I thought Mary Carrillo did an excellent job describing the stakes and what this match meant for both players.
It is indeed the dream final. The rivalry renewed after 2.5 years. We've been looking ahead, hoping this would be the final match. And for Steffi Graf, this is a very important day for her, isn't it, Mary?
For both of them it is. I mean, I have to salute both these players for even getting here. What does it say about the heart and the competitive fire of both these two, that with all the problems they've had, they're the ones who are fighting for this last major of the year? It's a very important match for Steffi Graf. 2.5 years ago, when Monica Seles was stabbed by an anti-Serb Gunter Parche, and Seles is, in fact, technically a Serbian, and a lovesick lunatic who loved Graf so much that he stabbed the number one player in her name. I mean, as soon as Graf heard about it, the first thing that went through her mind was, oh God, I hope it wasn't one of my fans who did this to Monica. She visited Monica in the hospital that night. They both just stared at each other and cried. In the 2.5 years since Monica has been away from the game, Graf has virtually dominated women's tennis. She's won 6 Grand Slams of the 10 that have been played. There have been some others, obviously. Conchita Martinez won Wimbledon last year. Mary Pierce won this year's Australian Open. And Arantxa Sanchez-Vicaria won this and a French. But Steffi Graf has to prove now, I mean, she's got to get over all of the guilt she has felt, and it's been considerable. She's got to get over, playing Seles, who's playing such good ball, and she's got to sort of prove that she really is a worthy champion, or everything that has happened in the last 2.5 years is a bit degraded.
Mm-hmm. So, Bush, of the many things we learned in the pre-broadcast is that Graf went to the hospital the night before the final. She had an MRI on her foot, which came back negative, but throughout the match, you can see Steffi just smacking the hell out of her foot with her racket, indicating that something is wrong with her foot. But I'm no doctor. Should you smack it with a racket to get it to stop?
Especially with how those rackets are constructed at that point and the string tension put on it. It's probably like hitting yourself with a 2x4. It's perhaps not the best thing for a professional athlete to be doing. And it shows when she gets into trouble. And you have the comedic situation in the middle of the second set where they're trying to figure out what's wrong with her, and it ends up with her just asking for a new pair of white socks, which I thought was very amusing.
We have that. We have Monica Seles making the walk through the crowd. I thought to myself, like, this is an emotional moment. She made it all the way back. Parche failed. His idea failed. I read a lot about Monica Seles to prepare for this episode, and I think obviously it takes incredible heart and determination to fight back from that, but she's a really interesting person with a sunny disposition, I think, it comes across as a cliche, like, oh, I've been through a lot, but you see it then. You see it on the court in 1995 where it's a lot of smiles, it's a lot of, it feels really good to be here, but let's make no mistake, Bush, she kicked the crap out of everyone in this tournament.
It's comical, isn't it? Looking at her run for the pair of them, actually. If you look at the record getting into this final, this is a crushing, there are 2 players in the world, and then there's everyone else. That's it. That is what is happening in 1995. There is 2 players who are head and shoulders above everyone else in the world of women's tennis.
Conchita Martinez, who didn't want Seles to return to number 1 when she came back. Thank you for coming. That's a 6-2, 6-2 destruction in the semifinals. Graf took out Sabatini in straight sets. Graf only lost 1 set, and that was to our favorite Amanda Coetzer in the first round. So they're coming in pretty hot, and I think the quality of this match from the outset, Bush, it's pretty damn high.
I think it is, and I don't know when you want to touch on this, but I think it bears repeating. You mentioned Seles's very happy, sunny disposition. And I think she seems like a really cool person. You see interviews with her, but there is no hiding the fact that at this point in time, she is dealing with a weight problem, and she's dealing with an eating disorder. And there is some incredibly troubling things that come out of our obsession with how we look and what we put into our bodies and how we are seen by society. And she speaks at length about this, but it is obvious at this point in time that she's carrying a bit of extra weight. And so would you probably if you were stabbed in the back and you were away from the sport for 3 years and try to find coping mechanisms. But it is quite obvious here. It's not very often that you see an athlete of such incredible caliber, who is the number 1/2 in the world, looking a little heavier than you would expect from a professional athlete. She still looks amazing. For a professional athlete, she looks incredible, but it is noticeable here.
Monica Seles spoke to Kate Rowan of the Telegraph last year, and she spoke about the eating disorder and what she battled after the stabbing and everything else. And she says, quote, "So much of tennis is about body image, about sponsorships and endorsements and how you look. When I gained a lot of weight, I realized people just looked at me kind of like, how could she do that to herself? Sponsors would say to me, gosh, look at you, what has happened? And I wanted to say, I'm still the same person. It shouldn't matter. With our generation, we couldn't talk about it. It was swept under the rug. And to realize it is a disease like any other one. Food is there every day as part of your life." It's impactful. It's a lot. She is doing a lot of work in that regard as well. But this is not the same Monica Seles we saw in the late 80s, early 90s. This is a different player. That, to a certain extent, though, because right away from the jump, we see probably the two greatest traits of both players, in the sense that Monica Seles has got athleticism for days. She hits a fall-away forehand that's the stuff we see now, Bush. And you mentioned that mix of eras. She hit some shots in this match that we definitely see today a lot.
Definitely. And I think it's testament to the fact of how long she played post this match and how long her career was, that you think that Serena and Venus Williams, who we think is the sort of the pinnacle of modern day tennis in terms of when they came onto the scene, how hard they hit the ball, what their movement was like, just their overall athleticism, the fact that they are modern day tennis players in the sense that they were professionals, they took care of themselves, they had entire teams around them. And they were around, I believe Venus won her first Grand Slam in 99, I want to say. I think it was 99 she won the US Open in. So we're not that far away from that. And she embodies that in a lot of ways. She does look like someone who could play in 2020, really. She looks, the double-handed forehand is a little odd in some ways. You don't see it that often, but it's a beautiful technical shot as well.
Seles didn't drop a set in the 11 matches since she made her return, which is quite mad. I think Jana Novotná gave her a bit of a scare in the quarterfinal. That first set went to a tiebreak, but she was on point. But it was Graf who made the first kind of minor breakthrough with a bunch of breakpoint opportunities, which Monica Seles managed to save 5 in total, which included that fall-away forehand I mentioned. Huge backhands to get out of trouble. It's 4-3 on serve. The tiebreak, I think the first set overall, level-wise, it's probably the peak for both players, but it's extremely high, and you have to keep mentioning that this is not a case of one player waiting for another to make a mistake. Like, lines are being hit, and this pre-Hawkeye era, the amount of missed calls is jarring how many mistakes
I think you're right, but I also think the key points in the match, which I'm sure we'll get onto, I think the right calls were made. I do. I think
you are. No, you're right. You're right. And there is a moment that we'll get to near the end of the match that was extremely well called. I agree with you. I think so they show replays very, I guess, not often as they do now, which makes sense, I guess, right? Capability wise.
We also mentioned a few weeks ago when we covered Andre Agassi that I really appreciated the pace of play in the 90s. These two are not hanging around at all. There's no waiting 25 seconds, grabbing the towel, dabbing yourself down, doing all your routine at the back of the court. This is, give me the tennis ball, I'm going to serve, and I'll sit down at changeovers. And it's pretty damn nice to watch. And this is not shot clock era, because they're probably taking 3 or 4 seconds between points as opposed to 25 seconds.
100%. Pace of play was fantastic. Tiebreak comes as expected, you think, after watching the first set. Graf was relentless on her serve, but at 5-5 in the tiebreak, it fails her. It's a double fault, leading to a set point on Monica Seles' serve. She thinks she has an ace. It's called a fault. She does a bit of like a jig to celebrate. Steffi Graf, incensed, I think, that Seles thought it was in. It was not. Correct call, like you mentioned, Bush. I didn't know you were backing the Lions people today, but I respect it. So this, I think, we talk about turning points and what happens, what changes the future of a match. So that happens. It's set point for Seles. She thinks she has an ace. It's called a fault. Graf is like, what are you doing? Second serve, 66 mile per hour duck that Steffi absolutely murders. She takes the next 2 sets. She wins the tiebreak 7-6, 8-6.
I think one of the things that you see the transition much more when the Williams sisters come on the scene is the second serve and the second serve more than the first serve is there is some weak serves in this match that get dealt with by 2 players who are very happy to hit through the ball from the baseline. But you can only imagine what would happen if you're dropping in consistently 70 mile an hour second serves to Serena, Venus Williams, Lindsay Davenport, Jennifer Capriati. They're going to get dealt with very, very easily. And it is an Achilles heel. Both of these women do not have, I wouldn't say excellent second serves by any stretch of the imagination. I think they have both fairly decent first serves. I know Steffi Graf she had an amazing serve for the era that she was in, but you can definitely see this point in time where it's not good enough to be hitting 100 mile an hour first serves. That's got to go up 10 miles an hour to really survive in the next era of tennis.
Yeah, Monica Seles hit a serve at 106 that people were like, oh my God. I'm like, okay, well.
Monica drops.
We got a long way to go. So that's the first set. And you have to be thinking, Monica Seles, she's carved her opponents. But I think the question was, could she survive in 3 sets, a grueling 3 sets against someone like Graf, who was on her level talent-wise and someone who's been in there at the biggest moments? That question would be there. And I think the answer was there. And the answer is a resounding yes, I can do this. Monica Seles answers the bell in the second set, picking up where she left off, basically. I think you could argue she might have been the better player in that first set. And she didn't let what happened in the tiebreak take her down. She bagels Steffi Graf in the second set, Bush.
You just try and think, Ray, what would happen if she won that first set? You think that the head goes down on Steffi Graf, the foot starts to play a bit more of a take a mental toll over her, and maybe this match is over very quickly in straight sets, and Monica Seles makes the fairy tale comeback. But I think winning that first serve, winning that first set, and specifically when that ball was called out on the supposed ace, it really did change the momentum of the match. And I think there is a certain amount of it here, which is clearly the foot is bothering Steffi Graf. Specifically sock when we have this sock situation, which is very amusing.
We thought Sissipas thought he was a revolutionary with having untieable shoes, but Steffi Graf called the trainer out to get them to bring her socks, which I thought was a strong power move and necessary. And also they kept saying that there might be something loose in her shoe, which is why she kept smoking it with her racket. I'm like, none of these explanations make sense. Nobody's a doctor. I love you, Martina, but none of that made sense. Why is she doing
There's something
that?
loose in her shoe. You mean like a sock? Isn't that what it's for? I appreciate Navratilova going off as well, being like, they have a racket a racket bag which is bigger than a house, but they don't put any bloody socks in it, which I thought was very amusing.
It was a classic, like, in my day, we came to court with 2 rackets and a towel. Maybe a towel. I'm like, all right, I know where you're going this. I like it a lot. We're talking about this with Fed a lot in terms of being a great front runner, and once you seize control, not letting up, and Monica Seles was exactly like that. There are a lot of Monica Seles matches where the will of her opponent disappears sometimes within an instant, because I think the formality of like knowing like, okay, Monica's ready to play, I'm done, was a large part of her aura.
Definitely. And she's relentless, isn't she? She's absolutely relentless in the second set. It is Nadal-esque at a certain level. And you would argue that Nadal probably takes a little bit of the way that he plays for Monica Seles, just given how well she strikes the ball. And she must have been an influence over a very young Nadal coming up, and watching someone with big shots on both big lefty forehands and backhands dictating play from the back of the court. She really does. She is very, very challenging to deal with when she has smells blood in the water.
The crowd is pleased. The tour is pleased. The people watching on television are pleased. We are going to a third set in the U.S. Open final.
Set point. First time for Graf.
6-love.
At the Open. Losing a set 6-love on the 7th ace of the match by Seles. Now we start anew. One set for the Open title.
The last time Steffi Graf got bageled, Bush, was the 1993 Canadian Open final against Jennifer Capriati, a match she ended up winning. Put that in the back pocket, because not only does she have that history on her side, the new socks are delivered right after she manages to hold the first game of the third set after being down love 30. That's a big moment. There are a couple, Bush, I think maybe 3 or 4 massive moments early in this third set that really set the tone for what happens later.
Definitely. I think this is testament to how good of a player Steffi Graf is. And if you ever want to understand why she won so many Grand Slams, I think I would point you to the game where she holds for 1-love after being bageled, and she's down love 30 and somehow wills her way to win a really, really important game, because it's very funny watching the end of the second set. You have 6-love, you don't get the changeover. You see it now, right? End of the set, everyone sits down.
Yeah, right? It's shocking. Shocking.
It's very funny because Seles fires down an ace, and then it's like, okay, that's the end of the set. We're moving on. Here we go then.
I was shocked. I'm like, what's going on? Why are they, what? They're still playing? What? I loved it, man. Pace-wise, wonderful.
Keep it going. I'm totally down for this. If we can make a few changes, with all the changes in tennis, unifying tours and everything, I'm down for,
Let's go.
Changeover happens every 2 games. That includes if you lose a set, stay there. You got to serve.
Yeah.
Serve it out.
Exactly. They need to make you the commissioner of all tennis, Bush. I'll sign off. So Graf is struggling physically. Obviously, she's got some things wrong, but I guess the other aspect is she's so good tactically, so good at positioning herself well that you gotta like her chances. Like at this point, Monica Seles has 1 more games, 1 more points, made less unforced errors. We're even at 1-1 in the third set, and yet how good Steffi Graf is, you're like, okay, I still need to see 1 more show from Seles that she can actually get over the finish line in a setting like this. And we get to that moment, maybe there's an opening for Seles in a Graf service game, and Steffi is working extremely hard. You're wondering, is this the moment where maybe it's over? The injuries are too much. There's a lot going on off the court. Maybe Graf cannot handle it, but she holds.
It's enormous, and the momentum of this final is all over the place. But lest we forget that Monica Seles has not dropped a set in this tournament, and she's not been extended really at all. And I know the pace of play is very quick, and these two are not hanging around less than an hour really to get to this point in the third set. But you do wonder how much the physical toll is going to take effect on Seles throughout this third set, simply because she hasn't had to play that many matches. She hasn't had to go deep, and she is dealing with that weight issue, the additional weight carried around. She's in incredible shape. She's probably close to as peak physical condition, but you never know, right? She hasn't been extended as far as this in a very, very long time. So if she can hang around in this third set, it's gonna be testament to how good of a player she is.
Of the millions of tennis cliches, one of my least favorite is like, oh, they haven't been tested yet in the tournament, or oh, it's been too easy. Yeah, it would have been nice if someone gave them a problem in the quarterfinals, maybe. But in this case, I think it might have been true that she might have been better off if she did get extended to the limit before the final, because she really didn't have to. And we're talking about someone who hasn't been on the tour in 2.5 years and returned literally a month ago. Like, it's crazy. It's absolute. And she's playing one of the greatest players of all time. It's of all the things Monica Seles has done in her career, it's so many to list, so many remarkable things, but it's all so damn cool. And I apologize for not finding a better word, but it's truly inspiring. And I was really pulling for her, but you knew when she couldn't take that shot at 2-1 to take the break, and Graf holds again, that it was going to get very dangerous for Monica on her serve. And of course, Graf manages to break right away to make it 3-1, and from there, it looks like she's going to cruise.
It does look that way. Can we do a quick aside here? Because I couldn't find a better place to do this. Maybe off the top would have been an interesting spot for this. But Dev, we talk at length about fashion in this era from some of the finals that we're watching. The outfit that Steffi Graf is wearing here is extremely poor. It's
shocking.
It's not very good at all. But I will say, and I know this is going to be a shocker for someone who is so against the 90s in so many ways, this is a very, very good outfit for Monica Seles. This looks like it could be worn in 2020. And that is shocking for the 90s. Oh, God, no, he's not having it.
20. Okay. Well, I'm with you with Steffi Graf. I mean, the Adidas headband is terrible because the three stripes do not lend itself well to be displayed like that. Like, it looks like someone just drew three lines on a white cloth before the match. It's insane. I mean, Seles, the skirt's kind of cool, but I didn't think it was too revolutionary. I think she was with Fila at this time as well, which, when I release my dossier on the Fila files from 90s tennis, we'll get everything we need to know, but that didn't warm my heart at all. But,
it's hilarious.
Also, Seal. Okay. While we're on this track, though, did you notice? So the Seal is in the crowd. Grammy recording artist, Grammy Award winner, sorry. So this is 95. He's best friends with Boris Becker, who's playing Agassi after this match. Okay, cool. But I just looked into Seal, and he is a massive tennis fan. And Kiss from a Rose came out the next year. So this is probably also peak Seal. We're talking 95. Like, this is the moment.
I would also encourage everyone who is curious to go back and check is to watch the 1995 men's final. If you want poor fashion, we're in the era of the baggiest clothing you will find. Andre Agassi looks very close to like he's wearing a dustbin bag. It's so enormous. It's very, very funny to watch.
Yeah, I wonder if that's why Jim Courier was considered a square. Like, he looked like a square compared to Agassi, but I don't know. It was, man. Okay, that aside is there. Now, we talked about Monica Seles enjoying the moment and enjoying being there, and I thought that was a great example of that. She's serving to make it 3-5. She hits 106 mile an hour second serve ace. She's just smiling. She's beaming, and listen, she didn't win the match, but I think she won everything else she needed to do. She needed to win, if that makes sense, Bush, coming back to this moment.
I think it is testament to the fact of how good Steffi Graf was at putting the boot on the throat, is that Seles really doesn't get a whole lot of opportunities in the final sort of few games of this match, considering how good of a player she is and how cleanly she's striking the ball. Graf just knew how to grind out points, and when you're in the final stages of a match like this, every single point becomes magnified in terms of its importance. And I think they talk about this on commentary, just how nervous Steffi Graf looks, closing this out, and she still does a pretty admirable job for it. And it's funny considering how many times Grand Slam winner is she? She's like a 17-time Grand Slam winner. To see someone who is... It's insane. I mean, both players there are nerves, but it's pretty funny to hear the commentators talk about how a 17-time Grand Slam winner is struggling to close this one out. I personally didn't see it. I thought she looked pretty comfortable crossing the finish line, I have to say.
I think it's fair to say she shut off entirely in the second set strategically. Because I think with the foot issue and with the leg issue, I mean, if you know you're going to lose a set, why overexert yourself, right?
Definitely. I think she was throughout that second set. I think she was very well aware that she needed to get things right with what was wrong with her feet and close it out, put a line under it, and move on to the third set. And I think she did that pretty admirably. She
did. Steffi Graf won her 18th Grand Slam, tying her for the record shared by Chris Everett and Martina Navratilova, who was in the booth. Must have been a very cool moment. She is still the only player ever to win each Grand Slam at least 4 times.
Wow.
Not much else to say about that, Bush.
I mean, just let that one sink in, right? You don't really just need to give any analysis to it when you just have to think about it for a second.
Remarkable. We mentioned the issues with her father being in jail for tax fraud. Steffi's mother and her brother were there in attendance. I think Jim Nance kind of, it's like they're rounding up the troops, and I think family support was massive for Steffi. You saw her hug her mom after the final point, and it's a lot to go through. You can only imagine your dad's in jail. The guy who stabbed your biggest rival is not in jail, sending you flowers. Like, haha, I did this for you. Like, what a bizarre backdrop for all of this. But Steffi wins number 18. And I thought what Monica Seles was able to say in the post-smash trophies presentation was pretty fitting.
I wanted to thank you all because just from the first time that I walked here at Monday night, it's been amazing electricity when you walk into the stadium. And this is one of the reasons why I came back to feel this excitement again. And today I definitely felt it. And thank you for all of you.
That was the 1995 Women's U.S. Open Final. When we come back after the break, we'll cover the aftermath and where we move forward. We are back, Simon. Steffi Graf, Monica Seles. It's fun as hell, and it also led me to go watch a lot of other stuff. Specifically Monica Seles, because I had managed to go back and watch Graf enough. I think my sister loved Steffi Graf as well, and my dad was a big fan, so I think I watched a fair amount of her then, and I did some homework today and yesterday watching matches, but I didn't see enough of Monica Seles in her prime to really make a judgment on her. But I think that was my favorite part of doing this episode, is watching her play, because it's what a unique, special talent she was.
I think I'm the opposite to you. I think I'd seen enough of Seles in my life, and I hadn't seen enough of Graf, which is amazing considering how much she won. This was probably the first match I'd watched of hers in the entirety of it. I'd not sat through an entire match, which is I think scandalous for someone who calls himself a tennis fan to have never seen one of Steffi Graf's Grand Slam winning titles. It's bad on me, and I think that's largely testament to the fact of just the era that I grew up in, and the fact that she did look like a player who looked a little odd, a little strange when put up against Venus Williams, when put up against Kim Clijsters, people who came after her that didn't play in the same way. So it's kind of cool to go back and look at these players that you hear about, and to a certain extent what they did and what they achieved throughout their career. But once you go back and actually watch it and see it with your own eyes, you get a sense of how they did it and what it meant to be a fan at that point in time.
When you were watching Graf, did that backhand slice look familiar? Because you've seen it when you played me on the court. That's where I got it from. Probably just a little bit off, but around the same level, I'd say.
Yeah, I think actually I saw a lot of it in you, definitely, without a shadow of a doubt.
This is not a lie though, that I did do the one-handed backhand slice because of Steffi Graf, because she made it look like it could be a dagger dropping through the air and go for winners. So that is true. I
always find it funny when people do like player comparisons. I think to a certain extent, everyone who grows up playing a sport, regardless, tries to play like someone. I think there's not many 10-year-olds. If
you're swinging a racket, you're playing like someone, right?
I think it's very amusing when you see like tennis forums or you see people talking. It's like, oh no, I grew up playing like David Ferrer, and you're like, no.
What the hell does that mean? What does that mean? David Ferrer is probably playing 10-year-olds as a 2-year-old and winning based on how good these guys are. So Steffi Graf missed the 1996 Australian Open, but she dominated the rest of the year. But I think that something that we saw obviously play a part in this final would be a recurring theme through the golden years of Steffi Graf's reign on the WTA Tour. Lots of injuries. She managed to capture her 22nd and final Grand Slam at the 1999 French Open, where her husband, which we mentioned last week, Andre Agassi, he also won, her future husband. So, man, it's crazy how that works. Monica Seles, Bush, you know Monica Seles' record at the Australian Open.
Yeah, it's astonishing, isn't it? She's insane.
They want to rename Margaret Court Arena, or they haven't because it's insane. Rename it Monica Seles Arena. She's just remarkable. So that 96 AO that Steffi misses, Monica wins that one for her 9th and final Grand Slam, beating Anke Huber. She made 2 more Grand Slam finals after that, losing to Graf again at the U.S. Open in 96, and then Sanchez Vicario at the French in 98. Monica Seles played for a while. She played for a while after this. She made it into the aughts. which
Definitely.
I think you mentioned this off the top, Bush. It was weird. It was a bit weird seeing her against the people who are still playing today.
Yeah, and you look at the transition of what happens in the late 90s, early 2000s. It goes from Seles as the young upstart to almost perfectly seamlessly into Martina Hingis taking up that role as well and being very dominant on the tour, specifically the Australian Open. And then it transitions into Venus and Serena Williams and Lindsay Davenport and Jennifer Capriati. So you can see the sort of the timeline divide between these players of when they came about, but it is a very strange sort of sandwiching period of those 10 years where Seles started out the decade just demolishing everyone who came in her path. She just laid waste to by the end of the decade, she was being surpassed by players who were 10 years younger than her and saw her growing up, took what she did and took it to an absolutely another level. It's pretty amazing. What a cool legacy to have as someone who really pioneered and kickstarted that era of aggressive baseliners. She was the pioneer for that in a lot of ways at the top of the game, and she has a pretty good legacy for that.
Seles became friends with Petra Kvitova in 2016 after Kvitova dealt with her own horrible situation when she was stabbed in her apartment by an intruder. Seles, quote, "It's a bond that probably neither of us would like to have. I hope maybe when we are old one day, we will be able to share more." John Wertheim commented on Seles' retirement. Seles became far more popular than she was while winning all those titles. It became impossible to root against her, at first out of sympathy, then because she revealed herself to be so thoroughly thoughtful, graceful, and dignified. When she quietly announced her retirement last week at age 34, she exited as perhaps the most adored figure in the sport's history. As happy endings go, one could do worse. I think it's pretty perfect. I think using sports as a way to describe other things that are happening or inspirational tales or something to believe in, something that you need to pick you up, especially in times like these as we currently deal with a global pandemic and a lot of uncertainty and just general sadness going around. I think it's we look to sports sometimes as a way to be like, you know what, it's possible to come back from this. So you know what, you may be down right now, but you can come back. And though it may sound like BS most of the time, and like, yeah, sure, you're just saying that. I think if you said that, or if you wanted to use an example of someone being like, no, it's possible. Monica Seles is that example of being who she is and becoming that person, staying that person throughout all of this. And listen, I have a lot of love for Steffi Graf, and she is obviously one of the game's legends. But for me, this episode was about Monica Seles and what could have been, because I think there's a little doubt in my mind that she'd be up there with Serena and Steffi right now.
Couldn't have said it better myself. It was like a perfectly poignant closing of this episode and the chapter on Monica Seles, who was truly astonishing during her career and continues to be amazing post-career and a really wonderful person. And I would encourage everyone to check out interviews with her, certainly through the 2010s, and read her book as well, because I think it's a really good read and she's a very inspirational figure.
You can email us, podcast@openera.ca. If any questions, concerns, tips, suggestions, hit us up there. We are also on Twitter @OpenEraPod. Big thanks to our intern Elias for helping us with the notes this week. And of course, producer, magician Clayton Hansler on the ones and twos. We are on patreon.com/OpenEra. For $3 a month, you can help us continue to make the show and make it better than ever. We are on iTunes, Stitcher, everywhere else you find your podcast. A rating or review would be super helpful as we continue to try and grow this podcast out. For Simon and myself, thank you for listening. As always, talk to you soon.